Hey everyone, thanks for joining. Today I am speaking with Jimmy Bangash, and I think I just mangled your name.
No, you did it really authentically, actually. Yeah.
And Jimmy is a does life coaching. He does some life coaching for Free Hearts, Free Minds. He's also I don't want to call you an activist unless that you want to what you want to take on. But you speak a lot about ex-Muslim issues, LGBT issues, basically human rights issues. And anyways, thanks a lot for coming on, Jimmy. It's always good to talk to you.
You're more than welcome. It's good to see you again. It's been a while, eh?
Yeah, it's been quite a bit. Yeah. So I was actually wanting to speak to you because you've been tweeting about some of this stuff, and I've been seeing it here, and I kind of been talking about this too. Is how like all this new anti-racism is actually turning into something quite racist, and it's making your work harder, or any of us who are trying to like say speak out about certain things that like the hijab or homophobia in Islam or something like that. It's making like we have to fight two battles now. It's like we have to fight the battle of okay, if you're talking about forced hijab, you have to fight that battle. Now you have to also fight the people who should be helping you, defending the same thing you're trying to like speak out against. And it's not like again just on that hijab thing. We're not trying to ban it. We're not trying to force everyone. We just want to make the choice freely available to everyone, whether you want to wear it or not. Right?
And also, I think highlight and explore the concept of choice as
Mm.
well. Like, is it actually, if a Muslim woman says, I chose to wear this, but actually she's also being taught that if she doesn't wear it, then her brain is going to boil in hell.
Yeah.
Like actually how much of that is choice, but even trying to explore that can be now be seen as uh, being ironically being misogynistic because you're trying to tell a woman that it's not her choice. Uh, I mean, my mind is just blown by this. Like, and then also Islamophobic because what you're doing is criticizing an Islamic garment, and then neocolonialist, white supremacist, and racist.
Yeah.
Like, and these things that we absolutely kind of had figured out before, yeah. Like there's these things that we had just figured out before that we had a consensus on that actually, you know, dictating to women what they should wear and essentially slut shaming
Mm.
them um, was not okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
and how much of the hijab is about slut shaming? Like I'd argue
Mm.
entirely, and all of a sudden we're pretending like that's not a thing, and we're not clear on that. It's okay to slut shame women. It's not okay to slut shame women anymore. It reminds me of Douglas Murray's new book actually, where he talks about all of a sudden we're acting really certain about things that we don't know much about, and we're acting like we've forgotten facts or things that we agreed as a society, which we really got to and embedded within our communities, which is actually women shouldn't be forced and coerced to wear things.
Yeah. No, but that's just it. It's again. It's okay. I was trying to figure out what was going on since I got back from overseas in like 2014 because I had no access to social media, didn't know, and I come back and it's I don't know if I'm like the frog that was thrown in a pot of boiling water and everyone was just sitting there while it came to a boil and was getting used to it because I came back to a world gone mad, right? Like I'm like,
Yeah,
what the hell's
yeah.
going on? And it was only when I really started reading like critical race theory and gender theory and queer theory because back in university I'd read some postmodern stuff. Um, when the first stuff on intersectionality came out initially, it had it's got some legitimate claims in it. Like all of this stuff does. It's based on you know wanting to do some good, but then
Mm,
the trajectory it's taken has gone wrong. And I mean, it's like everything's turned on its head. You know, it's I mean the idea of racism being power plus prejudice, and it's you know and I never understood it until I started reading critical race theory what they actually meant by that. Like the whole system is racist, and that's what gives white people power. So even if they're a homeless white person, they have more privilege than a CEO of a Fortune 500 company who happens to be black.
Yeah.
And like for me, that's like I don't know how to argue against that.
Yeah, how do you? I mean, I think it's a bit easier for me to argue against it because I'm so well versed in all of the identity politics rhetorics because I was like an identity politics champion, right? So when I found identity politics, I was like, oh my God, intersectionality, it makes so much sense. Yeah, this is completely the truth of it. And you know, things like cultural appropriation, I think, you know, a lot of people who hear about cultural appropriation, they're not really well versed in the distinction between cultural appropriation, cultural exchange, and cultural assimilation. But because this stuff made so much sense to me, I just threw myself into it and I was swimming in this identity politic pool. And then I was like, crikey, but when I want to use the same terms and apply them to Islam, everyone's saying, no, that's not okay. So when you talk about sexism and misogyny and actually men are oppressing women. When I say, yeah, Muslim men are oppressing Muslim women, everyone's like, shh, no, that's not okay. They're an ethnic minority, they're a minority group, you can't talk about it. And I was like, but hang on, if we look at the oppression of women and we compare it within Muslim communities to non-Muslim communities or the white Western communities, where is it occurring more? Like it's definitely over here in the Muslim communities. And surely we should be looking at, you know, the worst incidents because that's what we really need to address. Like I'm much more interested in talking about and addressing honor killings than I am about talking about why are tampons taxed. Yeah?
Yeah.
And you know,
Or
maybe tampons
man
shouldn't.
spreading.
Yeah, or manspreading on the tube completely. Like, so for me, I'm like, actually, you know, one of this is a life or death situation. The other one is there's not enough space on the subway. Yeah. And I'm really interested in talking over here. But when I tried to bring the whole rhetoric of identity politics to this conversation, and I saw the response was, no, you're not allowed to. And the only places we seem to be allowed to take it is to white communities and use it to beat up white people. That was really problematic for me, and I was like, you know what, I need to step away from this. And I think also that, you know, you pointed out this thing about racism, where racism used to be discrimination and looking down at another race based on the fact that there was a racial difference, yeah, seeing one race as superior to the other. But now this academic redefinition of that word to mean that racism equals prejudice and it also has to be combined with power. Where we use that word in the West, we always assume that, well, it's the white people who have power. So therefore, they can't, and minority groups don't have power. So therefore, white people are the only people who can be racist and minority groups can't be racist. Yeah? But if you look at that, Obaid, what you've done is redefine the word racism to exclude its application to one race, yeah, and say actually the only race that can't suffer racism is white people, yeah. That is the original definition of racism.
Yeah,
you took something and you removed and you applied it differentially to a different racial group.
exactly. And okay, and another thing I find extremely racist and extremely condescending in like that whole idea is white ways of knowing, meeting reason and science and logic. You know, and like free speech is a tool of white supremacy. It's like, no, I mean, there's two quotes, one by Mill and one by Ibn al-Haytham, and they basically say the same thing. If you want to look at an argument, go to look at the source of the argument, read the best defense of that argument, and, you know, attack that, right? But I mean, so like they're saying that this is white man stuff, and I'm like, sorry. The next time you speak to, you know, Dave in Wichita or Birmingham for your Microsoft support, and he sounds an awful lot like Raj from Big Bang Theory, like think about that, you know, like. But telling me that I'm lesser and that I don't understand this, how is that not racist? Like, how is that not, you know, like the logic of this stuff is so convoluted. I mean, again, with the feminism, like, it's okay to talk about, you know, what white people do to women, but it's not okay to talk about what happens within any minority community, right? No, you can't talk about that. Like I said, it just, I don't know. I read it and I see where they're coming from, but then they just lose me at one point. I'm like, this is just too crazy.
Yeah, and I think you're right in that it comes from often a place of, these are minority communities. They've historically been marginalized, and actually pointing out flaws in these communities in terms of some of their ethoses or their practices is going to equip the far right to further demonize them. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a really weird thing there actually, is because if the only people talking about honor killings is the far right, well then people are going to pay attention to the far right and join their ranks, because actually they're the only people talking about girls getting killed. But that's why it's more important for the rest of us who are not far right to have these conversations and say, actually, you know what, somebody shouldn't be killed because they've shamed their family, whatever that might consist of. Because then reasonable people can see that there are reasonable people having this conversation and align themselves with reasonable groups.
Yeah, and one thing also about this too is just, and this is like something that's a little bit downstream, but this was in universities first, and then I don't know about the UK, but at least in Canada and the United States, it started coming into like the high school level, and now in a lot of the states, it's from like kindergarten all the way through the end of secondary. I mean, in Seattle, in New York City, they're teaching maths through an ethnic lens. Okay, they're teaching maths, talking about how
I don't
maths.
even know what that means.
No, I'll send you the link later, man. You'll laugh your head off, and you'll be scared to death about it too, because they're saying math was culturally appropriated, and again, it's a white way of knowing, and this is how they're teaching maths. This is how they're teaching every subject through this lens. Okay, in the late 80s, when you had the rise of the Crips and the Bloods in the States, and then in the early 90s, you had like a white supremacist resurgency. Then you had the movie like American History X and things like that. All these people who are doing the counterterrorism, or counter extremism, we're talking about, well, they find the loners. They find the kids who are dissatisfied. They find the ones who feel disenfranchised. Teaching this to kids, you're making them loners. You're making them disenfranchised. You're making them think everyone's attacking you. It's a breeding ground for extremism one way or the other. You're going to create more white supremacists. You're going to create, as far as I can see, if it's in the Islamic community, it might create more people wanting to go towards ISIS. Sorry, I'm just going to ramble for a bit. Like Mona Alatawe, like I don't know if you saw the recent thing she did.
No, I didn't.
Okay, she was on this thing in Australia, Q&A, and someone brought up how Obama said we should, when Obama spoke out against cancel culture just recently, and she's like, I don't care about civility, decorum. These are words created by white men to control women. We don't want civility. We don't. And she's using all this language, and so that's. I mean, I've heard of this, and I've started seeing it. It's coming into like progressive Muslim circles where they're combining Islam with social justice. In the States, it's happening with the evangelical and the Baptist communities, where social justice is coming into the church. I mean, you're giving people an excuse to have victim mentality, and then people like Linda Sarsour are going to use that to their advantage. I mean, it's something that's so easily gamed and so easily turned to, you can use it to your advantage. Like someone like Linda Sarsour can use it totally to her advantage, and she gets a lot of like, quote unquote progressive support because she uses that language, and she smuggles in her, extremist ideology with that.
So I've always been a fan of Mona Eltahawy, actually, and I loved her book Headscarves and Hymens. I haven't read her new book that's come out yet, actually, but that doesn't mean that she says things that she doesn't say stuff that I completely disagree with, and the stuff that I completely disagree with is when she goes off on white people generally, right? So the social justice and Islam combination is really interesting, again, because it's just so mind-blowing.
Yeah, I mean, but they're diametrically opposed, but I don't know.
It's literally the most mind-blowing thing ever, and you don't see it in any greater concentration than you do in the gay Muslim community. Like they have completely internalized it as something that's, just now the new Quran, I guess, the new Hadith. So it's really interesting watching it in these spaces because you'll have like, so we went to something called the Inclusive Mosque Initiative, like a bunch of ex-Muslims, and they opened that up. And obviously, this is being held not in a mosque because no mosque will host gay Muslims. But they held it in, like, I think it was the basement of a hotel. And it was a female imam who opened the event. And she opened with like, if you're a white man, if you're a straight white man, think about how much space you're taking up here. And it is such a bizarre thing and so the whole, through the whole event, straight white men or white men were mentioned in a derogatory way, probably about 10 times. Yeah, in the khutbah, it was mentioned a number of times as well. And it was so bizarre because you're like, actually, the reason that we're having this event in a hotel basement and not in a mosque is because of brown men, not because of white men. Like the white men aren't going to do anything to you if you try and hold a gay Muslim event in a mosque. But brown men will have a hell of a lot to say if your ass doesn't get, physically beaten up around trying to do that. Then they'll certainly have some words for you. And I find it so disingenuous because often what they do in these gay Muslim spaces is they talk about white privilege to remove the microscope or the magnifying glass away from looking at Islamic homophobia. And by talking about white privilege over here, then all of a sudden you're talking about white societies and demonizing white society, and no conversation takes place about Muslim men, who are predominantly brown, right? Yep. And what I find really absurd about that is actually what would further the struggle of gay Muslims, tackling white people or tackling the homophobia in their own people of color communities. Certainly the latter, right, in terms of gaining your acceptance. Because we know that in the UK, 69% of the population say it's okay to be gay, right? But if you take that to a Muslim community, well, 52% say that it's not, that it should be criminalized. Not even that it's not okay, but that it should be criminalized. So when you mix this social justice stuff into Islam, particularly in the gay community, it just takes the focus away from where it needs to be. And then, as you said, makes them paint themselves as victims rather than as agents for change.
Yeah. I mean, also, like, what I really don't like about it is, I mean, like you're talking about, like we're talking about the white, it's a white man's fault. So when you bring it up, oh, well, that was, if you talk about something in India, well, that was because of the colonial system and the colonials brought this in. But, I'm sorry, the colonials didn't do anything to Muhammad. He was a colonizer. But, they oh, no, no, that's white, that's white history or whatever. Like, everything's being revised. And it's, again, what you're talking about, okay, demonizing the white men, bring it into feminism again. White women sit down. Women, give women of color the right to speak. Now they have this thing called, I guess I shouldn't say now, I only heard about this year, was BIPOC. So Black and Indigenous People of Color. So Black and Indigenous people of color are more oppressed than brown people. So you should step back and be an ally to them and give them more space. Because so I mean, you're putting people of color against each other now.
And we have QPOC as well now, which is queer people of color, queer person of color, and it's this continually funneling down, isn't it, to however many identity politic groups you can subscribe to, which will then eventually end in understanding that we're all individuals and that it's individual rights that we should be fighting for in terms of universal human rights. It's absolutely bizarre. I sent a tweet out the other day. And I did a Facebook post on it just to see what would happen, actually. And I made sure there was no tone to it, like no one could understand whether I was joking or whether I was serious. And I put, if a white policeman stops an honor killing, is that racism? Because he's literally using his power and prejudice to stop her death, which is a cultural practice. tweet went everywhere. But it was a really interesting thing to throw out there, and it reminds me a bit of. Do you remember sati, the
Yeah,
Indian
yeah,
practice of
yeah,
sati? So my understanding is that through colonialism, that practice actually stopped from pressure from the white people. Which so this is like a cultural practice where we
yeah.
used to,
The
if you
widows were
died, you'd
burned.
burn. Yeah, should be burned alive, right? Um, but actually, under colonialism, that was stopped and outlawed.
Yeah, I don't know if the story might be apocryphal or not, but it's credited to Naismith or Napier. I forget his name. He was the the governor at the time or the viceroy or something. Horrible person, like not defending him. But when he heard about this, what he apparently did was put up a gibbet and said, "It might be your culture to burn widows alive, but it's my culture to hang anyone who does it."
Mm,
Okay. Now, like I said, you can look up the history of this guy. I believe it was Naismith, could be Napier, but he's a horrible person. Like I'm not defending him as a person, but that's where this thing comes in. Again, talking about like this colonialism stuff. A friend of mine, Melissa Chen, just recently wrote an article in the Spectator USA about the protests in Hong Kong, and she said, if it wasn't for British colonialism, Hong Kongers wouldn't know what they're protesting for. They wouldn't be protesting, right?
completely,
You know,
completely.
and we can talk about the harm colonialism's done. I mean, you and I are both from. I mean, you're living in the belly of the beast, so to speak. But like I was born in India, a British colony. My family moved to Canada, another British colony, right? So, but I can see the differences. But I mean, we can talk. But this idea that it's always your fault. Like I mean,
Yeah, yeah, completely. Completely. And also a bit like, we have to acknowledge that stopping Sati is a good thing. Yeah,
yeah,
like
oh yeah,
that's a good thing. It happened under colonialism. It's a good thing. But somehow if you acknowledge that, well, then you're a race traitor or you're, some kind of like, you're not a real Asian person, you're not a real brown person. And you're supporting white supremacy by saying that. But I think, like, what are you saying that actually, because sati, which was an Indian cultural practice, was stopped by white people, then are you saying that was racism as well because it was power and prejudice against what they saw as a backwards practice? Or can we just agree that that's a commitment to universal human rights, that women shouldn't be burned to death? Like,
yeah,
it doesn't matter who comes up with it. It doesn't matter whether you're white or you're brown or you're black or whether you're East Asian. Actually, anyone who takes that stance is being committed to the human rights of those women. However bad that person's history may have been and what other colonialist activities they've done, we can unilaterally agree that actually burning women isn't okay? Or are you going to say that actually, well, it was an Indian practice and it's their culture?
yeah. I mean that thing always bugs me. The cultural relativism.
Mm.
Again, because it's. I mean, okay, a lot of this stuff. Because I mean, the logic is like a Mobius strip. It turns in on itself. Like there's
This
so
is it. Yeah.
someone who will tell you to stop protesting the hijab because it's a cultural practice will then ask you to join a protest against the Korean embassy because they eat dog. You know, that's their cultural practice. Who are we to say that's not a good thing to eat, right?
Yeah.
Like, be consistent at least.
Yeah, there's no consistency. There's absolutely no consistency in this identity politics, social justice arena, and also, and it's starting to do this now. Like you can see groups turning in on each other. Yeah, like you in the UK, they've launched a group called LGB Alliance. Yeah,
Yeah.
which deliberately omits the T from the LGBT acronym, and they actually stand in opposition to a lot of what the trans activist movement are pushing forward with. So this constant sort of going downwards, 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 identifying everybody as victims, acting like everybody's got the same struggle, yeah, it's just farcical. And then actually what you see is people starting to say, actually, you know what, hang on a sec, we've all been told that we're victims together. Let me take a step back and just assess how true this is. And this is kind of what LGB Alliance have said, is actually, just going to take a step back and see lesbian, gay and bisexual are all sexualities. And we've had trans put in with us, which is more about gender identity than it's about sexuality. And actually, we're going to distance ourselves from that, because actually what we find is that some of the things that the trans movement is doing, it can be quite anti-lesbian and gay. Yeah. So the LGB Alliance is really quite opposed to putting kids on hormone blockers, for example. Yeah.
Yeah.
And really opposed to teaching children that actually, if you are a girl and you like to play football or do stuff that is more associated with male gender, that doesn't mean that you're born in the wrong body. Yeah. So LGBT Alliance will take umbrage with that. Whereas the trans activist movement would be like, oh, it's okay if you're a girl if you're a girl who likes to play football, it's most likely because you're trans. And actually, then looking at how can we help you to become trans, and look at how can we help you to move across to become male, which might involve puberty blockers at a very young age. So I think we're all victims together has kind of muddied the water, and given this massive collective identity to people. And often those identities are in opposition with each other, not in collaboration.
Yeah. I mean, okay, the social justice thing. And again, I want to specify there's a guy in the U.S., James Lindsay, Peter Boghossian, and Helen Pluckrose did they call it the social. Okay. Yeah. And I mean, James, he specifies capital S, capital J, social justice as a movement, not social justice as an idea of civil rights, Martin Luther King, that kind of stuff, right? Like that is what we want. We don't want this movement that's warping everything around. And like the trans issue, like I'm glad you brought that up, because again, to me there's people who want trans rights, and that, yes, we want that. Everyone should be given that right to live freely. But then there's, just like everyone else, it's the loudest, most extreme fringe cases that are doing all this stuff, that if you're a lesbian and you don't want to sleep with a man who identifies as a woman and still has a penis, that means you're transphobic. No, I mean, I thought we were attracted to who we were attracted to, right? I mean, it's conversion therapy. Or like you were saying, like, okay, if a girl wants to play sports and this and that, or a guy is a little bit more, a little boy is a little bit more artistic, or, a little bit more, I don't know. Again, they're enforcing these gender stereotypes and saying because of that, you're a man. At the same time saying there is no such thing as a gender stereotype. It's all socially constructed. I mean, why can't it just be that, okay, fine, you're a girl who likes camping or, hiking or fishing or whatever, rough play, right? I mean, and when that girl grows older and she's able to make a better decision, and you're not, like you said, giving like puberty blockers and stuff like that, I think that should be illegal. Like, you should not be able to give that to kids, unless there's a lot more research, right? But once you can make once that child can make an informed decision, they're an adult. If they want to do it, more power to you. If that is what you need, go ahead. And again, you can support the child. You can, if a little boy says, I want to wear dresses, fine, go ahead, wear dresses. Be happy. But let's not fundamentally change, change your hormones. Like, try to do stuff to make them fit into something you want. Because, I mean, I saw one yesterday. It was on Twitter, and it was a 4-year-old kid, and the woman was like, "If my 4-year-old son can understand it, you can too." And he's like holding up a little sign, all genders can have their period. I can too. I'm sorry, a 4-year-old kid does not understand that.
It's really interesting when you said I think it was your podcast. You had Sadia on, and you were talking about the cotton ceiling. Yeah, and she mentioned the cotton ceiling, and it's not a term I'm unfamiliar with actually. There's this idea that if you're born male and you transition to female, but you keep your male genitalia, and then a lesbian doesn't want to have sex with you, that's an example of the cotton ceiling. Yeah. Because they're not treated, and that is transphobic. And when you said that, it I guess what it aligned to for me was this redefinition of words, yeah, and this broadening of definitions to the point where they become meaningless. So the way that the word racism is thrown around now, and the way that the word transphobic is thrown around now, it's hard to take the accusations seriously. So Martina Navratilova, she is a tennis player.
Yeah.
I think she's Olympian, actually. I think she was like
I think she's the
like
up until
she was
Serena
like
Williams, she was the winningest woman tennis player.
yeah. So she's just huge, right? And she's always been like a LGBT ally, but she came out and said, actually, very bravely, I think she came out and she said, men who transition to women shouldn't be allowed to play in female categories in sports, and we're starting to see like trans women really kick ass. Obviously they would, right? Because they've been through male puberty, and so that gives them
stronger bone density, more muscle, everything, right?
Increased lung capacity, increased heart, right? So the comparator isn't really fair. But whether you agree with Martina or not, actually, I think that this is what my point is. So whether you think that trans women should be able to compete in all female categories or whether you don't, labeling Martina as transphobic is absurd. Yeah? Just because she has an opinion that she disagrees about on trans issues, that doesn't make one a transphobe. Yeah, she's not out there trying to petition against the human rights of trans people. What she's saying is actually in this one arena sport, I think we need to have a more detailed conversation because I don't think this is fair. That doesn't make a transphobe out of you. Labeling somebody a transphobe because of that is absolutely absurd, and I'd argue means that you're labeling most of the population as transphobes if that's what your benchmark is. Similarly, this idea that if I'm a gay man and I'm Pakistani, so I am actually a gay man and Pakistani, handily, rather handily. So as a gay Pakistani man, if I try and chat up a white dude, and he says to me, or if he says I usually go for white guys, or I usually go for black guys. I don't know what happens if he says I usually go for black guys. So if he says I usually go for white guys, he's then labeling him as racist because he doesn't fancy me because I'm Pakistani. That's the thing now, right? Like if you don't, people get called racist because they have a preference for who they are attracted to.
I'm just going to interrupt you for 1 second. I'm going to answer your question. What happens if you say, okay, if the white guy said, no, I only like black guys? It's no longer, oh no, it's not that you're racist because you're fetishizing.
Fetishizing, that's, yeah. Like you're setting there's no space to win this, is there?
It's not.
Because I've seen the same people say, so I've seen arguments from people saying, you're, somebody saying to a white person, oh, you're racist. And they said, you know what, you're calling me racist, but my girlfriend is black. Yeah, well, you're just fetishizing her. And it's like, you really are trying to set this up so that the person cannot win and has to be found racist in some way or fashion. It's the same thing as like when we talk about ethnic communities who congregate together in geography in terms of where they live. Like if white people move out of that area, then it's called white flight. Yeah. If white people move into the area, then it's called gentrification. Is that you can't win? Yeah. If you do either, you just can't win unless we set up these terms that make it impossible as a white person to do anything that's not racist.
I mean, another thing is going back to the critical race theory, but this is also creeping into the gender theory and the queer studies and all that. So, as a white person, or okay, whatever, me as two of us as brown people, we will never understand the struggle of a black person, right? Now, so we're told, okay, you have to sit back and listen. So it's sit back and listen, but if you
listen doesn't mean listen anymore. No, the definition of listen has changed. Listen means agree.
Yeah, listen and agree, hear and agree. Yeah. But if you ask a question, can you try to explain this? It's like, no, well, you're exploiting me, so that's also racist. So you can never know, and when you try to ask a question to understand, oh no, that's exploitation. So again, it's a no-win situation. I
It's
mean,
not my job to educate you.
yeah.
Yeah.
But it's like,
Yeah.
well, then how do you expect people to, improve? Like it's and the shutting down of discourse, right? There's this complete shutdown of don't talk to that person because they're a white supremacist. Don't have that person because they're this. You label them that, and that's it. I mean, I think the most egregious one I've seen recently was there's this guy in the States named Daryl Davis. He's a black musician. This guy has 200 KKK hoods in his closet of people he's personally deconverted. He gets thousands of letters and emails saying, I heard you talk, you made me think, I've left the KKK. This guy, a black guy, walks into KKK meetings and talks to them. He's being labeled a white supremacist because he speaks to the KKK. I mean, come on. Like, what chance does anyone have if that guy is a white supremacist, right? Like, what
Yeah,
chance do any of us have?
no chance, no chance, I'd say. And also what I'm starting to see is the impact of this, because I think what we see is the social justice movement and the impact on people of color is, okay, we're all victims, but now at least we've got a vernacular to push back against our oppressor. And we've seen some really scary things like at universities in America, like people being deplatformed and lecturers, having to resign because they didn't want to go home on All Black Day and stuff like that. So that madness. But what I'm starting to see now a bit in both in my coaching practice and also my therapy practice is clients coming to me with white self-loathing. Yeah, like so actually saying, I'm overweight, I've suffered from anxiety, and I'm white as well. Like as if that's in the same category as, this is a problem being overweight, this is a problem being anxious, and then this is also a problem being white as well. Yeah, like you have to get your head around how crazy that is. That the answer to racism has become making white people loathe themselves. Yeah. And then when you say that, what we say is, no, we're not saying this is about individuals. We're saying this is about whiteness as an ideology. So they shouldn't loathe themselves. But when you run around saying everything white equals bad or white equals oppressor, well, then actually it's probably quite a logical thing for white people to start this self-loathing.
Okay. Like I said, I don't know what it's like in the schools in UK, but I mean, the universities that some of this madness has come in. But again, going back to the States and parts of Canada, when they're teaching this from K through 12, this is the anti-racism that they're teaching. I mean, I'm sorry, you're going to have a generation of screwed up kids. We just recently had a court case passed. The defendant won, or the plaintiff, I don't know. But anyways, this person was suing a midwife because the midwife listed a gender when they were born, and they're saying they were pangender now. Now, I'm sorry, but if you're taking this person to court, you're obviously, I don't know the full details. I don't know the age of the person, but this wasn't around when you were born. How can you sue someone for something like that?
Yeah.
And they won the case. Okay, I hope it gets appealed and I hope they lose, but we're making laws based, like at least Canada is. We've got laws now based on gender theory, right? And it's, again, it seems like I'm harping on this, but it's like, no, everyone should be equal under the law. You can't discriminate against everyone, but you're making these special protected classes. And I don't know if you saw the case of Jessica Yanev, who used to be Jonathan Yanev.
Was this the wax my balls?
Yes,
thing?
Wax my balls things. Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
So now the Human Rights Tribunal, the decision came out maybe a month ago. It was right after the Canadian election, so it was sometime in October that the decision came out that, okay, no, this is being thrown out. Now, if you read that, and everyone's like, oh, see, the sanity took hold. But you had 15 women who had their lives destroyed over a year.
Yeah.
Only 3 of them got money. They lost businesses. They had to go through this. And the money they got was $2,000, those 3. They got $2,000 each. But, I mean, if you read that judgment from that tribunal, one was because Jessica put in all these frivolous complaints, right? 15 of them. They said if only one had come in and they proceeded with it, then the other 15 fall underneath that precedent, right? The other 14. But also and so part of it was that. The other part was Jessica was not a reliable witness. Now, this law is set up to be gamed. Jessica tried 3 times before this, and they were all thrown out because didn't fill out proper paperwork or whatever.
Uh-huh.
Someone with half a brain can read that decision, come up with a valid claim, and be a reliable, good witness, and take this through. Right? You don't have to be a nut like Jessica Yaniv, because if I'm, someone needs to get some help to that person because it's not quite right in the head. Like, I mean, if you look at everything that, I mean, taking pictures, saying I have a period, I go into washrooms, ask 12-year-old girls if they have a tampon when I'm on my period. It's a man. Men don't have periods.
I'd love to see that case if the beautician was Muslim.
There were Sikh, Vietnamese, and that's another thing. Like Jessica, several times, all these minorities, they don't understand. They come to our country, so there's a lot of racism on that thing too. I can send you the link to the decision. It's long,
but it would be interesting because of how Islam is, championed in the West. Yeah. Like if it was a Muslim woman saying, actually, it's against my religion to wax you because you have male genitalia. Because in the area I live in, we have lots of beauticians that I can't go to because I'm a man, and it's done by Muslim women, and a lot of them, the places. If I wanted to do a massage, I'd probably have to move a bit further, go somewhere a bit further out of this area because Muslim women won't massage men over here. So it would be really interesting to see that case had it been with a Muslim woman beautician who was then saying, actually, I can't do this because it's male genitalia and it's against my religion. I wonder what that would have thrown up.
Actually, a couple of the people brought that up as there was and that was thrown out because of another case, and that was Marianne Auger, who's another trans woman. Took some people to, and so I haven't read that decision. Like, I'd have to go back and find that. And they said based on the decision of this, and so there the trans rights superseded the religious freedom rights.
That's really interesting.
I mean, again, I don't know the details of that case. So I mean, Vancouver does have, and I believe Marianne Auger is also in that area. I think it's got the largest Sikh population outside of Delhi. In Vancouver. So I mean, there's a lot of Sikhs there, but it was also a lot of not that there aren't Muslims there, but there's majority it's Hindu, Sikh, and then you'll have Asians. So you'll have like Vietnamese and Cambodian and Chinese, Japanese, a lot of that. So a lot of these women were Vietnamese women and Sikh women, and they were doing it out of their homes. But again, and now the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal has a definition of a Brazilian wax that is a service provided to women with a vulva, because that was the issue, right? The Brazilian wax was described as a service offered to women. So therefore, Jessica self-identifies as a woman, has full rights to any service offered to women. But then they had an expert come in say that a Brazilian wax has to be done on a vulva because that's what they're trained for. And we've got that in Canadian jurisprudence.
It's crazy, isn't it? It's almost like biological sex doesn't matter now. And actually, we know that it does matter. Biological sex does matter. And you said that case where the midwife was being sued for putting her gender as female. Well, actually, she was actually putting her sex down, not her gender. Yeah. And I think that distinction has to be maintained. But there's this continual attempt to try and blur those two things together. Actually, your physiological, biological gender is something. Your gender identity and your gender expression is something else. Yeah. But physical sex does matter. It's a biological reality, and we have to appreciate that that's a biological reality. Otherwise, we're turning the world on its head. Just to go back to court cases, though, and how social justice is driving the world nuts. We had last year our first employment tribunal where a straight white male took the Metropolitan Police Force to an employment tribunal because he didn't get the job. And he said, you didn't give me the job because I'm a straight white man and I'm not diverse enough for you. And I think a lot of us thought this was going to get thrown out, but he actually won the case. The employment tribunals was like, they looked at the notes, they looked at the conversations that took place, and they were like, you didn't give this guy a job because he's not diverse enough for you, and he's a straight white male. So he won that case. And it's the first case in its history that I know of, but I think it's certainly the first case ever to be won on the grounds of discrimination for a straight white male. Because all of the other discrimination cases that would be won would be around
Yeah.
protected characteristics of gender, race, etc., but for minority groups or marginalized groups.
Well, I mean, this was I can't remember if it was Oberlin or Wesleyan. So it was a white woman who was the president of the Diversity Council, transitioned into a man. Once the transition was complete, he was now told that you're not diverse enough because you're a straight white male, and was kicked off the Diversity Council.
Yes, I did hear about this. I did hear about this.
I mean, that's insanity.
Gosh, that is insanity. It's insanity. But this is what identity politics does, right? We're no longer interested in the content of your mind
Yeah.
and what it is you've got to say. We're more interested in the container of your mind, like the physical container of your mind. Is it a brown container? Is it a male container? Is it a Muslim body that you're in? You know, like all of this stuff is what matters now more than actually the content of what you're actually espousing.
Okay, when you just said body there, that's another thing. Someone actually tweeted this out, and it's because I've heard the term, and it just always freaked me out. They said all these people who are talking about humanization, they refer to people as bodies. Oh, make space for black bodies. You know, they take the humanity out of it. They're taking the humanity out of everything, and it's like you said, it's just reducing to this container of flesh, and it's just the spark that what makes you human. They're just reducing it to nothing.
Yeah, completely. Just whilst we're on the space of absurd terms, right?
Yeah.
So this new term which I heard about a month ago, homo nationalism.
Oh, good lord.
Gosh, it's a good word, right? I'm like, bring that out at Scrabble. You'll get like so much points. Triple word score. So homo nationalism is like when acceptance of homosexuality is used as some kind of benchmark for acceptance of your identity of that nation. So an example would be painting out Pakistani communities who are Islamophobic as, you know, they're not real Brits. They don't have British values because they're homophobic. So now all of a sudden calling out Islamic homophobia in Pakistani communities is racist. Do you understand? So you're calling out Islamic homophobia is racist because what you're trying to say is those brown people over there, they're savages and they're not real Brits. But if they subscribe to being gay being okay, well, then they become Brits because, you know, they're aligning themselves to what we see as British values.
But I mean, but again, that goes against the whole idea of, gay rights.
Universal human rights,
yeah, exactly.
Right? Gay rights are universal. It doesn't matter what color you are. It's not about whether you're a national citizen or not. But I would argue there's some legitimacy. If you live in a country that is 70% it's okay to be gay, and actually whether you're white or you're black or Asian or anything else, male, female, whatever, if your position is, I'm living in a country where the law says it's okay to be gay, where most of society thinks it's okay to be gay, but I don't think it's okay to be gay, well then yeah, actually there's some legitimacy to say you're not aligning yourself to the values of that society. Doesn't mean you're not a citizen by any means, because dissent is important, as we know, as ex-Muslims, but there certainly is the objective reality that you're not aligning yourself to the ethos and the general agreement of what that society espouses. But I'm not even saying that's a bad thing. You know, like if there were some people in India who are anti-Sati, that means they're not aligning themselves to the overall alignment of India. That's a good thing. Be anti-Sati. It's okay. Yeah. If you live in Egypt and everyone's homophobic and you're pro-gay, you're not aligning yourself to the overarching themes of that country. It's okay.
Okay, and that's another thing that really bugs me about this is, oh, well, we have to fight unjust laws, right? So when you are calling out, homophobia in the Pakistani community, and they're like, oh, well, that's racist, and you can't be racist, we're fighting you, and that's because that's unjust. It's like, no, the homophobia is the unjust thing. We're saying treat everyone equally. But it's not, I mean, as far as I can tell, it's not about equality anymore. It's about, okay, we were down for so long, now we have to be up for the same amount of time. And I first read this idea in the late '80s. It was a book by a French a sociologist. He was in Algeria during the time of the revolution, and he wrote this book called "The Wretched of the Earth." And his name is Frantz Fanon. Some really uh, uh, weird stuff in there. So he basically said any community that was oppressed, to gain equality and to gain uh, a good headspace or whatever, like, to clear their all the baggage and everything out of it, they have to oppress their oppressor for the same amount of time. I mean, it's and in Quebec they had a revolution in the early '70s, and they wanted to. There was violence. It was our prime minister at the time had called the War Measures Act. So it was like emergency measures, and Quebec was under martial law for a little bit, and a British High Consul got killed. Now, when they were taken to court, they called themselves the FLQ after the FLN, which are the freedom fighters in Algeria, and they didn't want to swear on the Bible. They wanted to swear on Fanon's book, and but that concept is, again, I mean, you have to go back quite a ways to figure out where this stuff came from. It's also the white ways of thinking. It goes back to Audre Lorde's a paper she wrote, and the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. Meaning like
Yeah,
free speech, science. I mean, she was talking more about
of
capitalism.
course.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I guess let me wrap up with this a bit, because it's been really enjoyable talking
yeah,
to somebody who doesn't who sees the nonsense in it all. Because like sometimes I feel I'm walking around in a mad world where actually a woman has to go to court to say she doesn't want to wax for a trans woman's balls. Like that's the world that we're living in now. And where if a lesbian doesn't want to have sex with somebody who's got a penis, then she's a homophobe, but then she's a transphobe. And actually, if we want to call out Islamic homophobia, which has the literal death of gay men all across the world, well, then actually that's a racist thing to do. But it's interesting that you said about laws, because when we try and call out homophobia in Muslim countries, what the social justice warriors always say is, well, those laws were instituted by white people. And so therefore, even when Muslim people are executing other gay Muslims and ex-Muslims or secularists, that's white people's fault as well.
yeah.
Like, that's how absurd it's got.
Well, yeah, it's everything's white people's fault, and it's
And ethnic minorities are infantilized as having no agency or choice.
yeah. And I mean, okay, I write very poorly and not very often, but that was like the first thing I wrote when I tried to get back into writing prose after 20 years of technical writing.
Mm.
I said that, like, I would rather someone call me a packy or a raghead, because I can deal with that. I know how to deal with that nonsense. But someone telling me that it's not my fault because I'm brown and I was too facile to have caused my own issues. I'm sorry. I'm more than capable enough of fucking up my own life. I don't need some white person to do it.
Yeah, completely. And also the offense, some of the stuff is so offensive. Like, we have, so you have software programs that will edit the job advert for, so that the English doesn't ostracize BAME communities. Yeah, like, so maybe if the job advert has got the word leadership in it, well, BAME people might not apply for the job because they can't handle that
Just
word.
BAME, that's Black, Asian, Middle
Black,
Eastern.
Asian, minority,
Right.
Black, Asian, minority, and ethnic.
Okay.
Um, so, so, or if a job advert has the word leadership in it, a woman might not apply for it. Yes, this is the psychology behind it. And I'm like, that is so offensive to think that actually you think I can't handle the same level of English, written English, as my white counterparts is absurd. And like, actually, Abed, I'm not trying to blow my own trumpet here, but people often tell me I'm an articulate individual. And I think sat next to many of my white counterparts, I often occur as more articulate. So to somehow say I can't read a job advert and it needs to be tailored to me because I come from a Pakistani community, because it's too eloquent when it's initially written and only white people would apply for that. That is so racist. And then to act like black, Asian, minority, and ethnic. So this is Chinese, other indigenous people. Like you can categorize us all as one group, and our English is all the same and at the same level, but white people have this elevated or different type of English. You know, myself and my Nigerian friends, we don't speak English in the same way. So don't put us all in one category. Like that doesn't make any sense. But it's all done in this absurd notion that by separating us out into different groups, you're making us more equal.
Okay, if you want to read something, and I only read it this year, someone recommended it to me. It's called Kindly Inquisitors. It was written in '93, and it was Jonathan Rauch wrote it, and he was talking about the Ayatollah and the fatwa against Salman Rushdie, and also the then in the States it was the religious right, and then what he called the humanitarian threat to liberal science. So he was talking about liberal science as in, the values of the Enlightenment, right? So universal values, human rights, and he called that liberal science. And he said you have the fundamentalist threat, which is the religious threat and all that, and then you have the humanitarian threat, which is, don't you want to fight racism? Don't you want to fight extremism? And they come at you with this, and it's like they'll stab you in the back while you're smiling and giving you a hug, and it's just okay. I don't want to keep you too long because I know you had a busy day. Harvard,
Thank you.
when they take away points from Asian students,
Mind blown. This is crazy.
and they say they're doing that to fight white supremacy because there'd be too many Asians on the campus. And I don't understand how too many Asians on the campus is white supremacy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like,
Yeah, I think everything is white supremacy. Like everything is white supremacy. Like if you burp, that's white supremacy. So not just Harvard, but Silicon Valley as well. Because I think we have to admit that East Asian kids are kicking everybody's asses, right? Like in the States,
yeah.
like they are studying hard and they're getting the grades. They come from families that really champion the traditional family values, right? And there's a lot of merits that come out of that. So
Actually, so are Indian kids. Like it's not necessarily all South Asian. Indian kids are doing really well as well.
Yep.
So
completely. So I think Silicon Valley, when they're recruiting now, they're getting over-representation in terms of minority groups from East Asians who are really into the tech, and they're struggling with this. They're like, okay, hang on a sec, this is diverse, but not in a good way. Like this is bad diversity.
Monodiversity.
Mono. Oh my God, you just coined a term, which in 5 years' time, someone is going to quote as a serious thing, right? So, so this kind of diversity isn't good enough. It's no longer about academic achievement and these people have worked hard. That's not good enough, actually. The fact that they've worked hard and they've achieved these grades is now being used as a way to penalize them. That is absurd.
Yeah, because, I mean, the only way I can wrap my mind around it is, I know what Harvard said, and I don't even want to get into that, but it's also because you've accepted the white way of doing things, you've become ensconced in whiteness. So it's just so,
because you've assimilated.
Yeah, and it's just
that's it. Yeah, as if there's only one way to be East Asian. You know, like that. That in itself is racist. That actually you've become more white. Yeah. So if you're eloquent. And if you are, if you attend all of your classes, well, then you're acting white. Yeah, which is another thing I often get hit with, like, oh, you act white, blah 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 blah.
Or you sound white.
Or you sound white. It's like, wait, because I speak English well, like that makes me sound white. It's such a nonsense, racist thing to say, and also the amount of, older generation people I know who are Indian, who make me look like my English is befuddled. Yeah, like they enunciate every single English word perfectly. They have vocabularies like they swallowed the whole dictionary, but they speak it all in an Indian accent. And I'm like, oh, so is that acting white or is that acting Indian? Which one is that? Because their grasp of the English language is better than most white people that I know, but they've got an Indian accent on it as well. And actually, I just feel like that's somebody who worked hard and learned a language really well. It's got nothing to do with acting any color.
Anyways, I don't want to keep you too long. It's been really fun talking to you, Jimmy.
Pleasure catching up again.
Yeah.
It's
Listen,
been fun.
if I know you like, I don't know if you have any things coming up, or if you want to let people know where they can get a hold of you. Like again, I'll put all your socials in the description. But yeah, go ahead.
Cool, yeah. People can hit me up on Twitter at Jimmy Bangash. My Facebook is Jimmy London. If you want to come and support the work that we do at Free Hearts, Free Minds, where we offer mental health support to people who are ex-Muslim in Muslim majority countries, please do so. You can look at all the testimonials on our website, which is freeheartsfreeminds.com. And then the last place you can hit me up usually is the Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain, because I do a lot of work with them, just promoting work around and awareness around ex-Muslims.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Jimmy, and thank you everyone for listening.
Great.